Hi, everyone. My name is Amber Johns. I am your host of the Brave Podcast. Thank you for joining us. If you've been with us for any amount of time, you know that Brave stands for bold, redeemed, anointed, victorious, and eternal. We have conversations that matter by tackling hard topics with hope. Thanks for joining us. Let's jump on in. Okay, Brave family, I am here with my dear friend Tina, and this is more of a heavier topic, even than probably what we're used to. But I'm so thankful, Tina, for you. I'm so thankful that you're willing to have it and just kind of be in this process with us. Just thank you for talking with us. We are going to be digging into, I guess the overarching topic is self-harm. This is coming from me from a personal standpoint with people that I know are struggling. And Tina, I believe God just gave me the perfect person to talk about this, specifically into the veins of what we understand to be cutting. But there's so much more to it that. But first, Tina, I would love for you to just give us a little bit of your background and why you have a heart for this specifically.
Sure. So I have been a licensed clinical social worker for about 30 years now, serving adults and primarily teens in the mental health arena and also substance abuse. So certainly self-harm has come into play in my private practice and really my entire career. So that's the clinical background that I have. I have a master's degree in clinical social work and just been serving a lot of young women in particular in my community. Not everybody faces this issue, but many do in different forms or another. So I can explain a little bit more about that as we go along.
Yeah, no, that's why I'm like, God just introduced us a couple years ago, and it's just been crazy how it's just we just keep intersecting. And then when I was wrestling with this topic because it's not familiar to me. I don't know if it's widely talked about. I know there's some avenues, but when it came into my like focus of there's specific people that I know dealing with this, I was like, man, I don't know much about this spiritually, mentally. Like I know we talked about this before we started recording. There's such an overlap. So I guess just like let's back up and just what is your experience in what leads to this? Like what, I mean, that's a hard topic to kind of cover. So
Yes.
what leads somebody into this space? If you could give us kind of like the build up. I know everybody's different, but what have you seen in your experience where this is why we end up here? But what starts this? What's the beginning process?
I think we really have to get back to the basics. I mean, why do any of us hurt ourselves? Why do we make decisions that we shouldn't? Why do we engage in behaviors that we know are not good for us? So that's a fundamental root. But when you look at self-harm or cutting specifically, there's two primary reasons why somebody would do that. There is either a deep sense of shame and guilt for something else. So from the Christian perspective, they feel like bad about themselves. They have low self-worth, like I am bad or I have done something wrong. And many times cutting oneself is sort of a self-inflicted punishment on because of another behavior that they've done that they're not proud of or they're ashamed of. But also, cutting is like a physical manifestation of an emotional pain, and it's deep inside of us. We've all had really complex emotions that sometimes some are easier to process than others. But it's that hidden pain that's inside of us that can develop for all sorts of reasons that we could go into. But if you look at a fundamental root belief that I feel these emotions, and we live in a world where it's stuff them down, escape from them, don't talk about them, and so we carry them inside of our bodies. And so cutting is like a physical manifestation. If you fall down and you cut your arm, you can see that, you can see it bleed, you can bandage it.
Mm-hmm.
It's not that it's easy or less, it might hurt, but it's manageable because it's an external thing. Like I'm going to bandage it up. it's going to heal and I will be okay. So the error that most people face is that they think your body will physiologically, when you cut, it will physiologically, chemicals will be produced, natural painkillers, so you feel relief in the moment. So if you're feeling guilt or shame or rejection or abandonment, you want to make that physical so it's easy and quick and it's out. It's a release. But where the enemy gets these girls is that it's a temporary relief. The same way if you were to take a drug or drink alcohol, it numbs the pain for the moment, but the root of it is still there. So it's just a physical way to express pain when you don't really have the words or you don't have the support. Like if I'm being abused and I can't tell anybody, right? I need to get rid of that emotional feeling, so I'm going to do something. Well, that then carries another shame. I'm going to hide what I've done. So you'll see, young women particularly like wear long sleeves at inappropriate seasons. They'll hide their physical scars because then it's just shame on top of shame. And at that point, I mean, think about that from a Christian perspective. If I'm piling, shame on top of guilt, guilt is sort of, I've done something bad. Shame is, I am bad. So I'm not even worthy of help at that point. So it's such a vicious, dark cycle. And it plays right into their self-worth, their self-esteem, embarrassment. I mean, nobody wants to show their physical scars that are self-inflicted, right? But it really is a telltale sign of there's something going on in here and I don't know how to process it.
Yeah.
Anyone who's walked through grief or rejection knows that it's hard and we don't want to talk about it.
Yeah, I just it's amazing to me because it's not like it's taught. Like, so,
Right.
And I don't think like, which will obviously focus on young girls and girls themselves, they're not getting together in a group and being like, hey, so I did this and it felt really good. And like, how do they get that idea? Like, where do we mentally go where, right? Like you could be in another room and I could be across the country and then another girl somewhere else. And we all have the same idea that this will give us release to do
Right.
this. Where do we all come to that conclusion when there's not like necessarily like, hey, here's a great idea. I mean, drinking, you can kind of get to, even, disordered eating, like there's so much
Right.
out there that pushes that. I don't, and maybe I'm naive as well, but I don't see where this is like a common, hey,
Yeah, I mean, I certainly don't think it's a slumber party conversation
right, that's what I'm
by any
saying.
means, but
Right.
it is out there, Amber, and I don't mean to correct you, but it is out there on
Okay.
social media. It is
Okay.
absolutely out there. People with, the buzzwords of depression or anxiety, right, which is the mental health diagnosis of, why am I depressed? What am I fearful of? In the spiritual realm, but we label it depression and anxiety. So I can go on Reddit, I can go on YouTube, I can go on Instagram, and I can find a following with these issues. And depending on who you're listening to, right? A girl could say, hey, I found relief this way,
Okay.
and as long as you don't cut too deep or you don't whatever, you'll be okay and you'll feel better, just like somebody could say, oh, Amber, take a load off. Let's just have a few drinks. You'll be fine. And maybe in that moment you are, but that it's a very, very slippery slope. And, I want to be clear that self-harm is not a precursor to suicidality. These young people generally do not want to die. They want to ease themselves of complex emotion and pain. But obviously, if you're doing things that are harmful to one's body, there can be accidental, injury. You can cut too deep, you can hurt yourself, you can, there's lots of things. Somebody may not find you, all these things that are causing accidental death, but it's usually not, I want to kill myself. It's usually just please take away this pain that I don't know how to process. I don't know who to talk to. I don't know what to say because their emotions are weird. They're complex.
Yeah. See, this is why we talk to you,
Yeah.
right? This is why you're here. But no, I appreciate there's a lot of fear in me when I hear you talk like this. Like I'm like, man, like what what can we do? And it could be talked about in those circles, but maybe in the faith-based circles, it's so much. And like you touched on it, and I've touched on it before, that double shame, especially if a girl is a believer, right? Like I
Right.
feel like then there's even more to it. Like I should know better. Like I know I have the knowledge of Jesus, and
Mm-hmm.
I still want to do this. And I'm assuming by the way you're talking, this is addictive, like just like anything else
Oh,
that
yes.
relief.
Yeah.
So how have you seen that played out in some of your like conversations and in your experience, where now we introduce a faith element to it, the addiction to it, and now we're in a, I feel like it's a never ending cycle. Like what do you have to say into that space?
Yeah, I mean, when you look at it, from a faith-based perspective, anything, literally anything that we struggle with, you know, we are to, put it before Jesus. We are to bring it to him. He is the ultimate healer. And so whether it's a physical pain, an emotional pain, a relational pain, a familial, disjointedness, whatever that causes pain within us, we're supposed to bring that to him, but the world has us doing other things, like the quick fixes, the click on social media, the learn what somebody else did, and we're not listening, because it's a dichotomy between the world and the faith-based. It's a dichotomy between mental health and faith, and we need to have the conversation as we are to bring them together. Like there is a whisper inside of a person's head that says, do this. It turns into almost like it manifests. It becomes almost like a compulsion, and then it's a physical reward system. Just like drug addiction, that you take a drug, you feel better, then you come down. Now you need more.
Mm-hmm.
You need more to get the same effect of relief. But really, we should bring our pain, before the Lord and say, I'm struggling with XYZ and I don't know how to process it, and I give it to you, Lord. So that in the mental health world sometimes sounds crazy, sounds woo-woo, sounds like, what are you talking about? There isn't a voice in our head that is telling us good versus evil, or good versus bad. That's called delusions in the mental health world.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And you would get put on medication. Well, I think faith-based parents really need to have the conversation of what voices are you hearing? And parents are so afraid to talk about it.
Mm-hmm.
But tell me what they say, and then you need to breathe life into your son or your daughter, and tell them that they're God's creation, and emotions are natural parts of the human experience, but we're not to live in that space. We're supposed to release them and grow from them, get wisdom. There's biblical scripture about your body, and it being God's creation and his temple, and we are supposed to honor that. But if I have all this peer pressure in the world and going to school and comparison and things that girls do, that's real life, and so this is a coping mechanism for that. So it really does need to be a conversation in both arenas.
Yeah. So like let's say there's not a problem yet. Like, and I have a 10-year-old daughter, 11, like, is there, because I mean, if it's not it's almost like, do I introduce this thing, or do I just simply ask like, hey, is there any sometimes where you just feel really negative? Like, what's a conversation I would have before we get, like, I will get to like, hey, I've discovered this problem. But before there's a problem, what's an appropriate, like, because sometimes you don't want to like have the conversation because you want to give the kid the idea,
Right, absolutely.
but also like you also want to prepare them. So what would you say if I had a young girl and I want to kind of preemptively have this conversation, maybe without being fearful, without being scary? Like, what are some navigational conversational tools that you would have?
I think with anything in parenting, is to talk with your children. Don't assume. Don't be naive. This is a very, very real and rampant problem, for today's youth.
Mm-hmm.
Um, they have social media to share it, so it can go like wildfire. So have the conversations. I mean, as a parent, if there was, a relative died, if you're going through a divorce, if there's some external factor of pain or trauma, usually if you're asking questions, or it's just a normal season of life, their grandparents died or whatever. But the sort of the gray area is, what if it is the parent? What if that is generational trauma and the parent is causing some of this battle within their child's mind? Or what if there's something going on at school that we don't see, that the youth is embarrassed of, if they're being bullied, or they don't sit with anyone at the lunch. I mean, we think as adults that, that's just, they'll come around, and it's good-hearted of us. But for an 11-year-old, that is real. That is the first time ever, maybe, that they've been rejected, or girls have been mean to them, and boys. I mean, it happens with boys as well. But, somebody's been mean to them. Somebody, became prettier or matured faster. And we think these are just no big deal. It's just the rite of passage. But it is a big deal.
Yeah.
So it's starting those conversations. Are your peers nice to you? Who do you sit with at lunch? So it's not about the self-harm or the devastating effects downstream. It's about, I want to know about your day. And you can come to me with anything. If there's a confusing emotion, and especially with faith-based families, we can't pre-shame them. Like, the Bible says, don't have sex, don't do this, don't do that. Like, if we pre-shame them, then they're never going to come to us because they already feel bad. So they need to know, in Christianity, you are going to fall prey to sin and temptation, and really having those open dialogues so that you can come to me with anything, even if it's a sin, even if you're absolutely horrified and ashamed and you feel guilty or bad. That's what I'm here for, as a spiritual mentor, as a mother, as a girl. Like, I'm just a girl in a 53-year-old's body. So I went through all the things that young people go through, but now you can up the ante by 1,000 because of social media and comparison. This is not what this podcast is about. I see the benefits of social media, but I also see the devastating effects of social media in what I do, for a living. Devastating, so it's this delicate balance, really. But parents have got to talk to their children early on about what are their struggles. And we may have been from a generation where it was like, I'll just pull yourself up by the bootstraps, ignore them, tell a teacher, but it's getting worse and worse.
Yeah, and it's way more complicated. Yeah, but it's like, I love that. And I love, I think sometimes when we're, Christians, and we say, like, no, literally pray about it, you kind of roll your eyes like, yes, okay, pray about it, but seriously, that's where the warfare is spiritually. Right. And then we also have the mental side where, there are people like yourself who have been trained in this space. They love Jesus, their prayer, absolutely. But now there's some tangible things that I'm going to walk you through, because we don't want to just kind of put a Band-Aid on it and be like, hey, like, pray harder, right? Like, we've seen that, like, just pray harder, right? Because that isn't, yes, we want to be at the throne of Jesus. Like, we want to be there in desperate prayer. Like, one of my prayers has always been like, if there's something dark, reveal it to me that I need to know about my kids, and he's answered that prayer over and over again. And that's a line, right, of defense against the enemy. And I think it's safe to say, like, this is a part of our world. The enemy is after our children. And this is like, and if we're made in the image of God and we destroy the image of God, that is exactly what he wants. And this is one avenue. So from your experience, when a parent has discovered or a friend or a coach, whomever, like has discovered that now we have this young girl, this young adult who has been
Mhm.
cutting. What do we do? Like, we see it, we're shocked probably by it, we're devastated by it. Now what?
Yeah, I mean, there's some resources out there that people can go to. There's actually documentaries that cover. I'm watching an episode of like something on Netflix that is I wouldn't recommend it, but it's very educational because it's about somebody who does self-harm. And so it's checking your resources, making sure that it is okay for your family, for your faith to utilize. But there's a crisis text line. I know kids really utilize their phones a lot, so I can send you those resources. There's a 988lifeline.org where people can reach out, and talk to both via phone and texting. So it's really really accessible, as kids know how to use their phone probably better than we do.
Right, right.
Absolutely. So, I can send those along to you because those are like national resources, in the mental health world. I also just, would like to mention that parents need to be aware of it's not just cutting, it's burning, it's, pulling their hair, it's, picking at previous cuts. There's lots of forms of self-harm, and that's why it goes so undetected. We think that it's going to be you know, something so visible that we're readily aware of it. Like certainly if my daughter, goes to soccer practice, I'm going to see the thighs of her legs or her forearms at some point, and so we become naive to it and almost desensitized to it. But it can be hidden on parts that clothes typically cover, especially like burning, things like that. So just to be aware that there's more than what the visible eye may see.
Yeah. And so how can families support like let's say the problem has been acknowledged and found, the hotlines are there, but like, we're sitting in our living room, at night crying with our husband or something, like what's the next thing they do? Do they reach out to a counselor? Do they reach out to I would be sitting there being like, what do I do today?
Yeah, I mean, I would definitely recommend, counseling, talking to a therapist. I don't even want to say like mental health counseling because it's not really a mental health issue. It is, but it isn't, because it's something in our brain is telling us to do this. So yes, it's mental,
Yeah.
but I don't mean it like it's diagnosable in the sense that there is something wrong with you and you need to go on medication for it. No, it's a manifestation of an internal struggle that they're having. And so talking that out with the therapist would be very beneficial. Making sure that they're qualified to do what they do, of course, but really starting to process those emotions. I mean, just a little quick, like anecdotal information, not a stat, just me, private practice. I've served hundreds of people. One of the things that is pretty stereotypic, um, of people, particularly men, young boys, is they don't know how to identify emotion. We think we do because we have words for it. There's even an emotion wheel of like, certainly we've all heard what jealousy is or what grief is or what rejection is, but do we know what it is when we feel it? Like what it feels like inside the body. I can describe it by Webster's dictionary, and because I've heard of it before, but when you feel it inside of your body, it is heavy, and most boys, they can identify sad, happy, and angry. I ask the question of many clients, like, tell me what rejection feels like. And they're like, what do you mean? It feels like rejection. And I'm like, no. What does it feel like in your body,
Mm-hmm.
and that sort of pulls it out of like, well, I feel sick to my stomach. I have a headache. I feel queasy. I don't want to go to school. I clam up, I start to panic. Like, and so parents can see if there's if what looks like anxiety because I don't want to go to school, and we label it as, school phobia. Well, why don't they want to go to school, and help them to process through those emotions, both at home and with a professional. So, it's really not about a diagnosis or mental health, but teaching kids how to process their emotions.
Oh my gosh, it's so good when you said that. I was like, whenever I'm upset, or like I would say rejection, or something, it's a stomach. Like I would get nauseous and like,
Yeah.
yeah, not. It's so funny you say that because I'm like, as soon as you start talking, I'm like, oh, mine's my stomach, 100%. I feel sick,
Yeah. And
and it's a lot.
most kids answer like, oh, well, other kids are being mean to me,
Mm-hmm.
and it's like, other kids are being mean to you. Like, oh, we all just want to shake that off.
Yeah,
But what does that do when other kids are being mean?
yeah,
Like, it feels isolating.
yeah,
It feels like you're never going to come out of it. So it's much heavier than what we who have moved past that in middle school.
yeah,
It feels so much heavier. And so when the enemy has them isolated, we all know what happens.
yeah.
The battle becomes up here in their mind, and not only is it true, they've convinced themselves that it's true.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's really finding a good counselor, I mean, is number one. And it's not just because somebody has a degree or they have fancy talk. you
Mm-hmm.
know I can run circles around people if I wanted to be all textbook and academic, but if I don't connect with that child, if that child doesn't trust me,
Mm-hmm.
you know, whatever. So I always start therapy where people are, I meet with the parents, I meet with the youth, and I tell the parents, I look at them and I say, your child gets to pick me.
Mm-hmm.
They get to go home and say yes or no, because if they don't feel, if they could not like my smell, they could not like my hair, they could not like my wallpaper, whatever it is, if they're triggered, it's not going to be a natural habitat for them to trust.
Yeah.
So building trust, there's lots of techniques to reduce harm. So, instead of cutting, I mean, a typical one is wearing a rubber band around your wrist and you can just pluck it, like this. You just pluck it. It's a fidget. You can kind of make it hurt a little bit, where it just like neutralizes, it to that area, but a lot of people don't recommend that, because then it can still, if you do it enough or do it hard enough, it can still cause bodily, scabs. So other things are like art therapy. It's really about distracting your mind from allowing the enemy to just wreak havoc on it. So if you're doing something else, creative, using your hands, yes, it's a distraction, but it's not something that's going to harm you.
Yeah.
Calling friends, calling the crisis line, talking to your parents, being among people, obviously, praying and releasing those dark thoughts, um, to our Heavenly Father and asking for help. In the darkest moment of anyone, what the simplest prayer is, just help me.
Mm-hmm.
Help me figure this out. I don't want to do this anymore. It's
Yeah.
not healthy for me, and I know it. You know.
That's where that verse comes in, right? Take every thought captive. And it's just,
Yeah.
and even identifying probably too, like when those thoughts are most pervasive. Is it at at night when you're laying alone in bed? Is it when you're like at school? Like I think you're such a wealth of knowledge. I feel like we could go on for another hour.
Yeah.
This is such a deep topic, but my heart for this conversation was A, to open up the conversation, make
Right.
you have available. I know you have like information for them if you were available to take on more clients and stuff. But you're just, I love, my heart for this is it's both, it's spiritual, but
Mhm.
there's some tools. There's tools in the physical world. God has given us people like you, people who are trained in it to see both sides. Like, I don't know if you can get much better than that. It's a combination. You're threading both because we're
Yeah.
human,
Yeah.
not going to shy away from that. So my last question that I ask everybody is,
Okay.
what does brave mean to you?
Well, I know from being your friend what it actually stands for,
Yeah.
but what it means to me is just to be courageous, and to really be bold in our ask. We're not meant to do life alone, and I'm certainly not the expert on the things unseen, and so just to really ask and pray those bold prayers because we can't as humans possibly figure it all out ourselves. So um, I've been bold in my prayers, and I'm going to keep going. It's just having the courage to say the thing that somebody else isn't going to say, as long as it aligns with what Jesus wants for our lives. And there's the joy on the other side of boldness and courage.
Yeah,
So,
and you're a testament to that in more ways than one. And I know I said it was going to be the last question, but if you could give just a final word of encouragement to, maybe the mom that has a daughter that is doing this, or a girl that can't stop doing this, like, what's just a final word of encouragement to them?
I just ask that you see your beauty, you see your uniqueness, and that you ask for help. It is okay. I mean, that is the most courageous thing that anyone can do, is just ask for help.
Yeah,
Whether it's your mother or your aunt or a teacher, just ask, and somebody will lean into that pain and come alongside you.
yeah, so good. Tina, thank you so much for your time
Welcome.
to get into a topic that is not easy. So I'm
I
so
know.
glad that you did this. So thank you.
Sure. Thank you, Amber.